There are some brilliant names in football history. Some were very famous, like Walter Camp and Amos Alonzo Stagg, John Heisman. Others, maybe not so much, but did some very important things indeed. Today, Timothy P. Brown joins us from footballarchaeology.com to talk about Walter Steffen and his contributions to the gridiron game. Tim has the answers coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal of positive football history. And welcome to another date with Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com, where he's going to share one of his recent tidbits on some of the facets of football from yesteryear. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Darren, thank you. Looking forward to chatting and judging you based on the quality of the questions that you asked this episode.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we're back.
I will be the judge.
So, folks, we are back to the dad joke segues. We've had some quizzes lately and some factoids, but now we are back to Tim Brown and his finest, segueing into an article that you wrote not too long ago, titled "Judging Walter Steffen's Coaching Career." So Walter Steffen, an interesting figure indeed in football history. So what do you got on him, Tim?
Yeah, so you and I were talking a little bit before we started the episode proper, and Steffen is just one of these guys that it's a name that I kept coming across over and over again, and I was just like, sometime I gotta kind of look into this guy and figure out what he was about, and he turned out to just be this really interesting character that just is impossible to imagine today. Right. I mean, he lived a life that no one can live anymore. Not at the major college level. You could do it at D3, probably, maybe in the right situation, and in high schools, but not at the major college level. So, I mean, he really, kind of a classic guy. He grew up in Chicago. 1880s, 1890s. He ends up at University of Chicago as a freshman in the fall of 1905. So he's playing for, Amos Alonzo Stagg. So he's on, 1905, Chicago was national champs. So he's in a pretty major deal as far as, football is concerned. In 1906, Walter Eckersall is the All-American quarterback at Chicago. So Steffen is the, second fiddle running at halfback. But then Eckersall graduates, if he graduated. He wasn't much of a student, but anyways, he leaves. And so then Steffen becomes a quarterback his last 2 years, and he becomes an All-American quarterback as well. So, and this is him carrying the ball back here. So
the only guy without any head protection on, I see.
Yeah, and so I may actually have the wrong image up there. Anyways, but he played in that era. So Steffen is he hangs around Chicago. He was, unlike Eckersall, he was an excellent student. Goes to University of Chicago Law School. While he's going to law school, he assists Stagg on the football team. And then, he graduates from law school, works a couple of years in the law. And, it's hard to trace whether he was, he may have assisted with some schools. I know he did some refereeing and things like that, which was, pretty typical of the time. But in 1914, he became the head coach at Carnegie Tech in Pittsburgh. And so, he was living in Chicago. And back then it was not uncommon at all. There were a lot of coaches who would live in one city for 9 months of the year, and then they'd go coach wherever they were coaching for the other three. And so that's what he did. So he hadn't, he was he was a Chicago alderman for a while. He, worked in different government capacities, in law. And then, so, he basically, in the fall, he would basically move to Pittsburgh to run the team, and then, probably maintain some level of practice. But basically, he'd shut down whatever his business was, for those 3 months, and then return and, work as a lawyer the rest of the year. So then in 1922, he becomes a Cook County judge, and Chicago's in, Cook County. So then what he did is he couldn't just go for 3 months of the year to Pittsburgh. So he basically stayed in Chicago, and then he would travel on the weekend to Pittsburgh if it was a home game, or to wherever they were playing, whoever they were playing, he'd travel to the game. And then there was a guy who was I believe he was a former Carnegie player, but there was a guy who was, basically ran the show during the week, a real trusted assistant. So, and all the time that he was there, he was upgrading the schedule. So Carnegie had been playing, kind of the smaller schools that are now, D3 schools, in, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, that kind of type of school. But while he was there, he starts upgrading. And so they're playing, basically a national schedule, but more, like a Midwestern, you know, Midwestern schedule, mostly against, or at least a mix of kind of the smaller schools, like a lot of teams did. And then they were playing, some top talent. So just as an example, in 26, they open the season, they beat, three lesser teams, and then they go on a run and they beat Pitt, who had been national champs a bunch of times by then, Detroit, who was playing, pretty solid football, West Virginia, who used to kind of not be very good, but by then was starting to, come around, be a pretty good football team. And then they hosted and beat a team called Notre Dame, who was being coached by Knute Rockne at the time. But this is 1926, and that was the year that, Rockne and Notre Dame won the 1925 national title. So they were big stuff. But 1926 is when Soldier Field opened in Chicago. And the stadium opened with the Army-Navy game. Well, Rockne was in Chicago for that game while his team was in Pittsburgh playing Carnegie Tech, and Carnegie Tech beat him, which was like, it was a massive, massive story. I mean, the only thing so the Army-Navy game was just a huge story in the papers, nationwide. Second to that was the fact that Carnegie Tech had beaten Notre Dame, reigning national champs, and, which nobody had expected. So then to show that wasn't just a total fluke, in 1928, Carnegie Tech goes to Notre Dame. So they go to South Bend, and they beat Notre Dame there. So that was Notre Dame's first loss in South Bend under Rockne. And it also made Carnegie Tech and Steffen the only team or coach to beat Notre Dame twice while Rockne was the head coach, other than Nebraska under Fred Dawson did it twice, and then Howard Jones beat Rockne at Notre Dame when he was when he was coaching Iowa, and then twice when he was coaching USC. So Howard Jones has one up on Walter Steffen. But nevertheless, I mean, so it's one of these things, like you hear nowadays, Carnegie Tech, and now it's Carnegie Mellon because, the schools merged. But, and you think, that's not big time football. Well, it was. If you beat the reigning national champ, you're playing pretty good ball, right? And then when you beat them 2 years later, you're still playing pretty good ball. So he ends up from 1922 through the 1932 season. He basically they used to call him the commuter coach, living in Chicago. Take the train into whatever city they were playing in, coach them game day, and then head back. And so how he kept in touch with the assistant who was running things day to day. I don't know, but they did very, very well. Just another thing that was kind of fun is he was the guy who gets primarily is credited with inventing the spinner play. So anybody listening, you've seen these. If you've watched any old time football film, you've seen the spinner, where a lot of times the ball might get hiked to a quarterback or a fullback who's kind of who basically catches the ball, like literally does a 360 in place as they're faking handoffs to different people, and then they might kind of do like a QB sort of draw, or they might run left or right, or hand off. So the spinner was a huge thing starting in the mid-20s when he first implemented it, and it remained in place probably mid-30s when it was dying out. But a couple other little factoids about the spinner is that he first used it in 1924, and the guy who ran that play, it was a guy named Dick. I've never been sure of his name. I think it's Bede, but maybe it's Beatty. And he was the guy he became the Youngstown State coach, and he's the guy who invented football's penalty flag when he was coaching Youngstown. And then people who aren't that into older football stuff maybe recognize the fact that one of his last quarterbacks, or perhaps his last quarterback that he coached at Youngstown, was a guy named Ron Jaworski. So anyways, that's the little tidbit on that one. But so then he ends up 1932 announces he's going to retire. He just can't. He was starting to get a little ill, I guess, and just couldn't keep up the pace. And so he ended up with an 88, 53, and 9 record. So
respectable.
Yeah, especially at a school like that, and playing the kind of schools that he played. And then so 32, if people remember from an episode or two ago, that's the year Amos Alonzo Stagg is let go at Chicago. So he's Steffen's retiring from Carnegie Tech. So basically he and Fritz Chrysler were the guys everybody said, oh, they're going to use one of these. They're going to name one of these guys to replace Stagg. And instead they brought in Clark Shaughnessy from Tulane, who is, kind of the father of the modern T formation. So, and then unfortunately, poor health, he passed away in 1937. So he didn't get to live the good long life that Stagg lived. But, he may have been one of the last of the, he was certainly one of the last of these part-time coaches at in a major school environment at the time. Probably at the time they would have been like a G5-ish or G3 or however many there are anymore. That level of football. And here he's a judge in Chicago, lawyer, and that's what he does. A couple episodes ago I mentioned, Clarence Spears. He's a physician. There were a bunch of guys like that, but he was one of the last ones who was, still running a major program. And then in his case, especially, he wasn't even there, during the season, the commuter coach. So really an interesting, days gone by, kind of deal.
Yeah, just when we think that our lives are busy dealing with football on a daily basis, you have guys like him and the Pop Warners and Fielding Yost that sometimes coach multiple teams in a season, and these commuter coaches and did some other full-time job. So yeah, amazing to think about that era of football. And
I think he had
things.
5 kids too. So
Yeah.
He was a busy man.
Well, at least the chores got done at home. He
Yeah,
didn't have
yeah.
to do them all, so that's good. Tim, that is like some great stuff that, that's a gentleman that probably we don't hear about very many places in this day and age. And it's great to have some preservation of Mr. Steffen and his accomplishments and some of the things that he did, and, beating Notre Dame twice and, all the other things that he did, which is amazing. So, but you have things like this all the time going on footballarchaeology.com, and you share them in some little bite-sized chunks. And maybe you could explain that to everybody and how they can enjoy those.
Sure. Just go to footballarchaeology.com and, you can subscribe. You'll get an email every time that there's, a new article that's posted. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter, on the Substack app, or on Threads, or just go out to Football Archaeology, kind of whenever you please, and see what some of the new articles are out there, or check out the archives. There's a search function. Just put in a topic and see if there's something out there.
Well, sir, we thank you once again for helping us to understand football of yesteryear and how it became the mega game that it is today that everybody enjoys. And it's these little pieces getting put together in a history that really make it enjoyable. And we thank you for sharing it again, and we'd love to talk to you again next week.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. Pigskindispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.